Halbert's journey with animals. Halbert's life on the outskirts of the village was anything but ordinary. His world was a patchwork quilt of rolling hills, meadows, and wildflowers, where the sun's first rays painted the sky in gold and the evening's last sighs turned the landscape into a canvas of purple and orange. This was a place where the air smelled of earth and rain, where the winds carried the scent of pine trees, and where the cries of animals echoed in the quiet. But most of all, it was a place where Halbert was never alone. At the age of 12, Halbert had learned the rhythms of nature better than most children his age. His father, a wanderer of sorts, had gone off to seek adventure when Halbert was very young, and his mother had followed soon after, leaving him in the care of his grandmother. The old woman, known as Grandma Elsie, had seen more years than she cared to count, and her home, an old stone cottage with a thatched roof, stood as a monument to the slow passage of time. Despite her advanced age, Grandma Elsie's spirit was as sharp as ever. And although she couldn't match her grandson's exuberance, she loved him with a quiet but fierce devotion. Together, they lived in a delicate harmony, surrounded by animals. Their home was more like a small farm, nestled on the edge of the village. It was a place where chickens clucked in the yard, goats bleated, and cows lazily chewed grass in the fields beyond. But it wasn't just the domestic animals that had Halbert's heart, he was also attuned to the wild ones. Birds perched on the windowsill, deer grazed at the edge of the meadow, and even the occasional fox would slink through the brush, eyeing him with curiosity. Halbert's connection to these animals was something beyond the ordinary. He didn't just care for them, he understood them. Every morning, he woke early to tend to the animals. The moment he stepped outside, the birds seemed to recognize him, singing in a chorus that made him smile. The cows greeted him with soft, affectionate moos, and the goats would nudge him playfully, begging for attention. The animals weren't just part of his world, they were his friends, his companions, his family. Grandma Elsie noticed the bond between Halbert and the creatures of the land. She often remarked that he had a gift, a deep, silent understanding of the world around him. But it wasn't always something she could explain. Sometimes, she would catch him in moments of quiet communion with the animals, his hand resting gently on the back of a cow or his eyes meeting those of a bird as if they shared a secret. She often said, "Halbert, the world speaks to us in ways we don't always hear, but if we listen with our hearts, we can understand." But Halbert was still young, and while he loved the animals, he didn't yet grasp the full depth of those words. To him, the animals were simply his friends, creatures he loved and cared for without question. One crisp autumn morning, Halbert woke to the sound of a rooster crowing. The sky was pale blue, and a thick fog clung to the ground. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake his grandmother, and ran to the kitchen where the fire crackled low in the hearth. Grandma Elsie was already there, brewing tea and humming softly. "Morning, Grandma," Halbert said, stretching his arms above his head. "Good morning, my boy," she replied with a smile. "The animals are waiting for you." Halbert grinned, then dashed outside. The cool air hit his face as he stepped into the yard, the dew from the grass wetting his bare feet. He loved the mornings when the world was still quiet, before the villagers awoke and the bustle of daily life began. The animals seemed to be in a similar mood, peaceful and expectant. He greeted the cows first, giving each one a gentle pat on the nose. Then he fed the chickens and gathered the eggs, marveling at how soft their feathers were. He tended to the goats next, laughing as one of them playfully tugged at his shirt. But his favorite part of the morning came when he visited the birds. There was a large oak tree at the edge of the yard, and on its branches, a variety of birds perched, chirping merrily. Halbert would stand beneath the tree and wait, and soon, a robin would flutter down to land on his shoulder. A squirrel would scamper down to greet him, its tiny paws soft against his skin. He would talk to them, his voice low and gentle, and they would listen as if they understood his every word. It was during one of these quiet moments that Grandma Elsie appeared in the doorway, watching him with a thoughtful expression. She knew this was the time when Halbert truly came alive, when his bond with the animals was most apparent. Halbert, she called softly. He looked up, his face lighting up with a smile. Yes, Grandma. She walked over to him, her steps slow but deliberate. Come, sit with me for a moment. Halbert obeyed, following her to the bench under the oak tree. He sat down beside her, brushing his hand against the rough bark. What is it, Grandma? He asked, curious about her serious tone. Grandma Elsie smiled and patted his hand. There is something I want to teach you today. Something that might seem small, but it is very important. Halbert tilted his head, waiting for her to continue. You have a deep connection with these animals, Halbert. A connection that goes beyond feeding them or caring for them. They trust you. And you trust them, don't you? Halbert nodded, watching as a sparrow flitted by. There's a reason for that, Grandma Elsie continued. You see, Halbert, animals have an incredible capacity for understanding. They can sense our feelings, our intentions. They don't speak like we do, but their hearts are open in ways ours can only dream of. And in return, they give us something precious. What do they give us, Grandma? Grandma Elsie's gaze softened, and she looked at him with such wisdom that Halbert felt a stirring deep inside. They give us companionship, Halbert. A kind of companionship that doesn't judge, doesn't demand, but simply is. They're with us in the purest form, offering their presence and their love. Halbert blinked, feeling the weight of her words. But, Grandma, they're just animals. They don't really understand us, do they? Oh, my dear boy, Grandma Elsie chuckled softly. You'd be surprised. They understand more than we give them credit for. They see us in ways we sometimes can't see ourselves. And that's why it's so important to be kind to them, to listen to them. The bond you share with them is not just one of necessity, it's one of love. Halbert thought about her words, watching a butterfly flutter by, its wings catching the sunlight. But how can they love us? They don't speak our language. They don't need words, Halbert, Grandma Elsie said gently. Love isn't just in words. It's in actions. In the way you care for them, in the way you listen to them when they're in need, in the way they bring you comfort when you're feeling sad. These animals are your companions because they trust you and they love you in their own way. Halbert sat in silence, letting her words sink in. He looked around at the animals in the yard, and something inside him shifted. He realized that, yes, the bond he shared with them was indeed something precious. Something more than he had ever fully understood. Over the next few days, Halbert found himself thinking more and more about what Grandma Elsie had said. He watched the animals closely, noticing the way they interacted with him. The chickens would follow him around the yard, their soft clucks like a quiet melody. The cows would nudge him affectionately, their large eyes filled with trust. And the birds would sing their songs from the trees, their voices harmonizing with the rhythm of his heartbeat. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the land, Halbert stood at the edge of the meadow, his hand resting on the back of a cow named Rose. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and for the first time, Halbert felt a deep sense of peace. Grandma Elsie appeared beside him, her face thoughtful. "Do you hear that, Halbert?" she asked. Halbert closed his eyes, listening intently. The sounds of the world surrounded him, the rustle of the wind, the chirping of insects, the soft murmur of the animals. But there was something else. Something deeper. The symphony of life, he said quietly, his voice filled with awe. It's all around us, isn't it, Grandma? Grandma Elsie smiled, her eyes twinkling. Yes, my dear. It's a silent symphony, one that speaks to us if we only listen. Halbert looked down at Rose, his heart swelling with gratitude. He realized that the animals weren't just companions, they were teachers, guides in the way of love and connection.